Hi, good evening and welcome to Concord's Town Meeting Study Committee. Today is January 28th, 2025. My name is Eric Moore. I'm the chair of this Town Meeting Study Committee and I'm calling the meeting to order at 7:05. Thank you everyone for joining. We'll begin with the roll. So Eric Van Loon has volunteered to clerk tonight. Eric, thank you. Welcome. We'll go through with the roll. Keith Bergman, please.
Present.
Thank you, Keith. Katie Bresnick, please. I don't see Katie just yet. Kristen Haggerty, please.
Here.
Alice Coffin, please.
Here.
Eric Moore, present. Parashar Patel.
Here.
Phil Swain, so that he'd be joining at about 7:30, about half past the hour. Chase Thompson. Don't see you online just yet. And then Eric Van Loon. Present. Thank you. Also present, Carmen Reese, moderator, Amelia McCaffrey, town staff, and Shannon McAndrew. Thank you. Moving right along, agenda tonight, we'll begin with public comment. If folks want to comment, with a 15-minute period for that. More details if we have folks who do want to comment. We'll approve available minutes, team updates in terms of the stuff that we're all working on. We have a couple of things to talk about with clickers tonight. Then we'll get into sort of talking through our approach to the report, which is a big deliverable for us. I'll mention as well that Katie Bresnick has joined. Hey Katie, thank you. So public comment. Anybody from the public in the room or online wish to comment at this time? Please, you want to come on up and give us your name, please?
Yes, there's no microphone over there, do we?
The microphones aren't on, we're just using that.
Oh, the microphones aren't on. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, super. There you go.
So convention up to 3 minutes. Sorry, up to 2 minutes,
Yes.
but we're not fussy about it. So
This is comments just on the town meeting, right?
yes.
Yeah.
Please.
Okay. Connie Levine, I live at 149 Stone Street.
Thank you.
And I had a couple comments. One was about the microphones at the town meeting. I thought last year having the pro, con, and the questions was probably not a good idea because I felt it was made things more divisive. And the whole reason for the debate and the discussion is to, have people informed. So you're basically saying people have to make up their mind before they even hear the comments. So I thought that was not a good idea, made it more divisive, and wasn't really giving people the option of taking the time, to make their decision. My second comment just had to do with we have the public hearings ahead of time, and people usually do their presentation. And I thought last year a lot of people were kind of unprepared for the town meeting. Like we had multiple zoning articles where you couldn't read, they didn't have the streets listed of that type of thing. So I thought that if at the public hearing, which a lot of people have traditionally attended, if there was some kind of form you could give out to people to just write some feedback about the presentations that could, be given to the people to improve them. Because I think back to the days of Chris Whalen and Ned Perry, and I know those guys spent a lot of time with people on the presentations, making sure they were as good as possible. So, I was just thinking of ways to make the town meeting go better. And also the handouts last year, I think were a little screwed up because I remember at one point, someone said they were underneath a chair out in the hallway. So maybe just having somebody like in charge of that, so it doesn't fall by the wayside. And that's it.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Which street do you live on? I'm sorry.
Stone Street,
Stone.
right downtown here.
Stone.
Any public comments from online, please? Anything? Seeing none, moving forward. So approved minutes. let's see, we have tonight, we have the minutes from our January 13th meeting, provided by prepared by Katie Bresnick. They're in the packet. Parashar is just about to hand us the minutes for the 19th meeting, but we'll review those for our next meeting. A motion to approve the minutes, please.
Make a motion to approve the minutes.
Second, please.
Second.
I
Discussion.
have a discussion point, that's a very small correction, but in the very first section where it says in looking into remote participation, Van Loon has determined the best path forward for the warrant article is to use the language included in the warrant. And I think it's more accurate to say close to the language or based on the language, because there's actually three separate things that are not exactly the same. And one of the issues that Alice has brought up in her prior experience is one possible way of going through the legislatures with other towns where we would want verbatim the same language.
Okay.
And the town council will be different from what was in the warrant, which is different from what is already in the warrant.
Let's come back to that too, but Shannon, are you okay with that?
Yep.
Okay, any other discussion on the minutes from the 13th? Let's move ahead to a vote, please. Let's go and jump back to the list, so I don't get it wrong. This is okay, so this is with a motion to approve the minutes from January 13th. I'll do roll. Keith Bergman, please.
Aye.
Thank you. Katie Bresnick, please.
Aye.
Kristen Haggerty, please.
Aye.
Alice Kaufman, please.
Aye.
Eric Moore, yes or aye. Parashar Patel.
Aye.
Phil Swain, not here yet. Chase Thompson, not online. And Eric Van Loon.
Yes,
All right,
as
so
amended.
approved as amended. That's 7 with no. Okay, so updates. I've been doing some project planning. We can come back and talk a bit more about this, but just to lay out the meetings coming up. We had the select board meeting last night. I'll update everybody on that, or Eric will. Meeting tonight, some clickers recommendations, talking about the report. Our next meeting following, the 10th of February. More on the report, specifically, I think, making sure that we're clear about who's going to be writing what. And 3 topic areas for improving town meeting. How things happen within the meeting in terms of the calendar, the consent calendar, questions around sort of scheduling high interest articles, question around adjourning earlier in a the second, looking at recommendations for changing how we deliberate, particular norms for time, speaker repetition, time caps for deliberation. We have a lot of practice right now. And again, do we want to recommend some changes or some experiments? And then third, how do we look at, in the broader context, the how to prioritize the changes that we're talking about? So, clickers cost something, having multiple locations for meeting costs something. But, to step back and go, what are the most valuable things? How would we rank in terms of the benefit for town meeting, the different things that we've talked about? So it's really focused on ranking benefits more so than costs. And I'll come back to how to frame that discussion, I think. And then after that, the meeting on the 24th, also on Monday, talking about what we know now and recommend for ADA and other accommodation support. Also discussing on the 24th ideas around meeting days of the week, the timing of meeting, and the duration of meeting. And then further out, citizen petitions in March, hearing compliments, and sort of the meeting locations and so on. So the program will work a bit more detail on this, and I'll send out kind of a more detailed project plan for our next packet. But I wanted to sort of lay this out for the short term and really communicate. We have a lot of stuff to get through, but it's doable. And I think, yeah, it's that. Any comments on that, please?
Thank you for laying this out. I do feel like we haven't had a lot of discussions about recommendations like days of the week and times, things like that, so that'll be good. One thought is, because you kind of laid out, which days we might be talking about it, if we could maybe put something in the paper, maybe if a letter to the editor said, you know, hey, this is what we're gonna discuss coming up.
Sure.
I wonder if we'll either hear a written comment before,
Mhm.
or, you know, I'd love to kind of get a little more than just what's in the room as well.
Sure.
Since it'll be real time, and maybe we can even, I would suggest that we put a little, more to it. So if we say we're gonna talk
Mhm.
about days of the week, we might say, we're gonna talk about 3 options.
Sure.
You know, and what those 3 are, and it'll just be like kind of 1 or 2 big topics that might be at these upcoming meetings to see if we
Sure.
can generate a little bit of input before then.
Well, I'd be happy if the opportunity arises, I'd be happy to talk in more detail about the topics ahead, if, you know, at Dakota, if you have time.
But we wanna keep it like brief enough that
Yeah.
people like will read it, so it'd be like, this is the date, this is kind of the big ideas.
Yeah,
And then see if we can kind of generate some feedback.
good, thank you.
I think that that's a really good point, because, you know, we learned last night from some of the select board members, they're saying in terms of clarity of communication coming from us, that there's a confusion in the mind of some people, but I guess has been conveyed to them, between remote participation and use of electronic voting. And, you know, we think of those as separate topics,
Yeah,
but that's not necessarily been communicated to people that are tuning in partly.
do you think a letter to the editor, in the bridge would be an appropriate thing to do?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to kind of write something, I just wanna, yeah, I can do that.
Okay, I can follow up with you too. Okay, good, thank you.
If I might just to follow up on Eric's comment, this is not a new confusion between remote voting and electronic voting. The first time that we tried out electronic voting at town meeting and the survey responses, what did you think of this? Many people said, really liked it, want to use it at home. So, people were clearly thinking that if you can vote by clicker, you should be able to take a clicker home and vote from home.
Good, thank you. So team updates, Eric, would you like to comment on the outcome for remote participation from last night's meeting?
Sure. So we met with all of our representatives, all 3, both our reps and Senator Barrett. They're strongly supportive and willing to do whatever we want. There is some real confusion there about why Wayland's proposal never went anywhere. And some cautioning that on the one hand, you can get a half dozen pounds or something to do it as a pilot project that can help get things through. On the other hand, the more that it's a matter of general interest, the more it's not really a local issue, and the more that all sorts of people get involved. And there is this confusion. There is a bill now reintroduced in January from June, the tail end of the last session, where the appropriate committee took like a dozen different bills and essentially proposed hybrid participation for
Right.
quote, all public meetings, but with an exception for town meeting. But the more that can both help the idea behind home rule petition, or it makes it, of the dozen bills that got pushed together into this, 2 or 3 specifically named and included town meeting. So it could easily come about
Mhm.
that members of the committee will want to amend it to bring it in as a general thing, so
The legislative,
the legislative committee, yeah.
yeah,
So, it's not, crystal clear what the best way is to proceed, other than, clearly we need to go forward with the town meeting petition,
Mhm.
so that when the legislature takes it up, it's not just our committee or just the select board, which that's another important update, voted unanimously last night to
Right.
be the sponsors of this warrant article. But that we really need to have a vote of the town.
Sure. I think, yeah.
A clarification
Yeah,
question.
Sure.
Let's see, how do I phrase it? So at last night's discussion, I'm curious about the legislation. My understanding, and I may have it all wrong, that the current permission that we have been granted by the governor was extended twice since it was first enacted. I think that's the right number, and it's due to expire soon, which is the one that allows town meetings to be held remotely. Not the town meeting, but town meetings. Is the bill that's being proposed to correct that, because it expires before our town meeting? It expires somewhere in April, yeah, it's in April.
Are you referencing Lexington's remote participation,
I'm talking,
with representative town
the
meeting?
way that they can operate remotely is under this special agreement under when the COVID agreement that allowed all public meetings other than town meeting to meet remotely.
Mhm.
And in their case, vote remotely. So I'm wondering whether the legislation that you're talking about was to address that so that it doesn't run out without a reauthorization, or whether this was meant to, as a stepping stone for remote participation at the town meeting.
It's a good question. The two are completely separate. That is what the legislative committee has been looking at, and Representative Cabral from New Bedford is both the chair of the committee and the lead filer of this, doesn't make any reference whatsoever to the
Extension of
pandemic
Okay.
limited authorization, and in fact, yeah, it's completely divorced from that.
Yeah, and I can add that the Mass Moderators Association, as well as the Mass Municipal Association, looked at the legislation that Eric is talking about. And it is a bill to make permanent the ability to have hybrid public meetings for boards and committees.
Okay.
And it does exclude town meeting.
Okay.
Both the Mass Moderators Association and Mass Municipal Association have weighed in favor of that extension, making that permanent.
But that's for public meetings other
Other
than
than-
town.
so-
That's right.
Yeah.
So the thing that we're hoping for then is action on a home rule petition around remote participation for town meeting,
Mhm.
open town meeting.
Yes,
And whether that's just us, or whether it's a part of a campaign with Wayland or whoever, is to be determined by the legislative strategy of our representatives.
in consultation with us, yeah.
Yeah, okay, cool. Good, thank you.
And right now, we know that Wayland is interested, and we know that Westford had a town meeting vote to submit this kind of legislation. But as of yet, we're unaware that they have filed anything.
When was their vote, as far as you know?
I forget, we have a copy of it. It was in the fall, I think.
Last fall.
So who is, I think I saw the draft language, right? And it was that, I didn't go to the select board meeting last night. Was that sufficient for them to file in time for the warrant?
Yes,
Right. So then is our part closed on the home rule petition?
I don't know what you mean by closed. We'll probably talk about it to sell it at town meeting for sure.
Okay, but I'm just saying, before the report, it's gonna go in the report. I don't think it needs to be sold. Okay,
You can consider that language submitted, and it will be included in the.
So can I ask, is it now an appropriate time to ask about the language in the home rule petition as we have it? I just want to make sure I understand one sentence. And make, if not-
Yeah, go ahead, please, because Eric can follow up if it's a real. Yeah,
So, now, of course, I can't get my computer to move.
Do you have it?
Um,
'Cause I thought it was in the packet, I thought I read it.
it's in the
It is,
packet,
yeah.
the packet up.
Oh, sorry.
I'm just trying to get to it. So there's one line and I think it's okay, but it's not as clear as I guess I would like it to be. It is a sentence that reads.
What section are you in?
I'm in. It says page 2 at the top, warrant article,
Good
proposed
section,
language for
yeah.
warrant article. I want-
Section 1, notwithstanding chapter 39?
Yeah.
Okay, that's section 1.
Page 34 of the packet.
Okay. It reads, the town may hold town meetings and special town meetings with voters located in a common physical location in person, fully remote or through a hybrid of a remote and in-person format. I want to make sure that I understand that I think I know what it's supposed to mean. I'm not quite sure the language says it directly, and you can help me. It's this is pertaining to voters located in a common physical location in person. Then there's
That's what we have
comma.
now. Yeah.
Fully remote isn't defined, so I don't know what that refers to, whether it's the common location, or does that mean my living room?
It's supposed to mean your living room, and there should really be a comma after remote. I mean, that's.
It just wasn't clear enough for me, so fully
This-
remote in any location, in any place, I could be on vacation in Costa Rica.
Well, that is
That's
what
right.
that means.
Yes.
Yeah.
As long as it's, so when I first read it, I didn't see it that way, so I wanna make sure that I.
How did you see it?
That you had to be in a common location, common physical location in person, or you could vote remotely from that common place. I didn't see it referring to, I could be anywhere in the world, my living room or Costa Rica, and vote remotely. I didn't see that in here, so I.
So, yeah, if you just put a comma after remotely, it probably fixes that. So it's just, we're talking about common physical location, option 1. Option 2, fully remotely. Option 3, hybrid of remote and in-person. So that's what it's intended to say.
And a clearer way to do it actually would be to put the word or
Mhm.
in front of fully.
Well, that's-
So it's a physical location in person, or fully remote, or a hybrid. of the
And
two.
maybe removing that
Yeah,
comma
okay. Yeah, you
after
could put
common.
whether you wanted to and a comma.
I think it's Katie.
I was gonna say,
Uh,
maybe
okay.
removing that comma after common.
Yeah, I could do that too.
Okay, so, at some point, there'll be a draft motion, at some point, there'll be a final motion.
Well, we'll fix it in the warrant.
I just wanna make, I think it's a simple fix, or works,
Okay.
you know.
Yeah,
So do you have that then, Carmen?
I have it.
Okay, cool, thank you. Alice, thank
and
you.
just
Yeah.
humorous aside, that was a sentence crafted by our town council, different from what had been in our warrant and different from what Wayland has, which was intended to clarify.
Right, but, and it's also, I think it's
Okay.
modeled on, Lexington's, proposed legislation. So he drew from both Wayland and Lexington
Mhm.
to try and keep it all in a common language that the legislature is seeing in other places. So, yeah, but this is easy enough to fix.
So, thank you.
Thank you.
Good, thank you, Alice, thank you, Eric. Shannon, may I ask you for an update on the calendar and the briefing book from last night,
Yes,
please?
so the calendar, as proposed, last meeting was approved by the select board, so the major changes were moving up the planning board public hearing so that their feedback and such can be incorporated into the briefing book on time. The other major change is that the motions deadline has moved up several weeks so that we can also work to include those in the briefing book. And we are able to print the warrant in the bridge, so that's gonna be going out shortly after the warrant closes, I would say a few weeks after we have our review with town council, and then it'll be ready to go on the bridge.
Cool, thank you. So, and the briefing book as well is, you're behind that, so.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we're marching forward with it, so
Yeah.
that'll be good.
So, yeah, big changes in a way in terms of how we're communicating. So thank you, Shannon. Keith, thank you for your initiative on the briefing book. Kevin, thank you as well for your work as well. I think one thing that'll be different, in terms of, what I get in the mail is that, I'll get the warrant. So we're used to getting, kind of a thick booklet with the warrant and the explanatory text in that booklet. So what I'll see as a voter now is I'll get the warrant, as an insert in the bridge. And then, before town meeting, a month or, I'm roughing the timeline, but a month or so after.
It's a couple of weeks before town meeting.
A couple of weeks before town meeting, the FinCom, what we think of as the FinCom report, and with all the recommendations, all the FinCom reporting, and all of the articles with their explanations will come out in what we're calling the briefing book. So I think for some folks, it may go, what? Where are the explanations, right, in the bridge? And they're gonna be coming later before town meeting in a single handout, so to speak, in a meeting. So, Katie, I recognize you. And then Carmen.
Yeah, I was just curious for the briefing book, since will there be a way to change like the cover page, or is that part of the plan so that it's clear that it's not just the FinCom report, but it does include those other items? Because I could see people disregarding it, and not reading it necessarily, not knowing what it is.
Well, don't tell the FinCom.
I know, I was hesitant to say anything, but I opened the document over the weekend to start kind of reviewing a little bit for things in layman's terms, and it's dense. And it isn't, the cover page isn't very catchy, so I could see that maybe we could do something to make it
Yeah.
clear what's in there.
Well,
We'll
we'll give
take
some thought to this. I'd be really in favor of doing something really fun with the cover of this book that's kind of, everything you ever wanted to know about town meeting, but we're afraid to ask, with, some artwork or something. And, we used to have very entertaining finance committee report covers. We had an artist who used to do those, and that artist retired.
It's Donna Thomas, and she didn't retire. It was a policy decision of somebody to
Really?
save the
We got
money or
a
something.
different year for that work.
She's my neighbor, she ain't retired. There is, one potential wrinkle in what we hope to have in this book. And that would be to have, the recommendations of the FinCom, the recommendations of the select board on everything. Back certainly, when I was moderator, there were a number of times when either one, but more frequently, the select board they might not even formulate their final vote and recommendation until, 6 o'clock the evening when town meeting.
Sure.
Because there are so many moving factors.
Sure.
And so it might be less than the totally comprehensive, everything in advance that
Sure.
would be ideal.
So recognize, there is a publication timeline. I think there's room for a handout at town meeting. That is, the Bedford town meeting, for example, is a single page, list of articles, multiple columns, select board recommendation, FinCom recommendation. I think there's room for that and how we communicate the reading. That would accommodate late breaking things, but I think because the briefing book itself is both online and a mailing. What we can do online, a lot of flexibility, but what we do as a mailing is locked down in the scheduling. So thank you. Sorry, I'm gonna recognize Keith, please.
Yes, I watched the replay of last night's select board meeting, and I was pleased to see where they recognized in the timetable that they were approving that they would need to have a meeting on May 5th in order to finalize their recommendations and meet the publication deadline. So that at least I think was a major step forward. I think it was an excellent discussion that they had, I think, about about the timeline and understanding that there are, that the motions are coming in sooner and that those need to be included, not only in this briefing book that will go out, but that the draft motions will be available even for the public hearings early on, so we can focus on that. So it was an excellent discussion. I want to thank the moderator for hand walking that through and having many discussions within the organization so that everyone was on board and understood the challenges. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Pete. Carmen?
Yeah, I do wanna say it's been, just so wonderfully positive to, see the willingness of everybody to pitch in and adjust how they're used to doing things in order to try and make this process better. And the select board's willing, the finance committee is willing, town staff is willing. And I'm willing, so, we will have hiccups. The first run through anything, there's gonna be hiccups, but I think we're definitely gonna have a better process.
Good, thank you. Moving on, Alice and Carmen, any updates in accessibility support? I think you were gonna talk to the assistant town
Jessica
manager. Yeah,
I did.
yeah,
So, it was actually a really good conversation. She's well versed in, she's an HR professional, has worked for the last 15 years in different towns and cities.
sure.
So the area of reasonable accommodations, which is, I think, what we were specifically looking at,
Yeah,
is something she's very familiar with. So I asked her, what are you doing now? And basically, she said her job around the reasonable accommodations falls into two categories. First, at the bottom of every meeting, there's new language, highlighted in a box.
mhm,
I will send this, I can include this in a packet for later. It tells people that if they have special needs of any kind, contact her, and we can provide for you whatever you need, if possible, to attend a meeting.
mhm,
But she also admitted that, that's not sufficient. She doesn't really work with, as what we think of as the general public.
right,
She could, and she allowed that in the last year since she's been here, she's had no request from the public for any kind of accommodation. And so we talked a little bit about why. She said part of it is, this is basically their marketing. So this is the only way people would know that there's something available. And she talks about how to up the ante a bit on the marketing and communication side to allow people to know that there are other options available. And as we talked about it, all kinds of ideas came out. So first of all, she works closely with the disability committee, and they are now doing a complete ADA assessment of all of our municipal buildings.
uh-huh,
So it's not just how you get into the front door, but how do you navigate? Is there a lower counter? I couldn't remember from the redesign downstairs at the general windows, whether there's any, a lower height, I just can't remember.
sure,
So they're doing a complete assessment of all municipal buildings. I know she talked about her conversations recently with the moderator, looking at public safety, emergency response, having responders at the meetings, having assistive aids to allow people to hear better in a very, large space. And they, to her credit, they have a new newsletter in town called the Inclusion Chronicle. And it's a general newsletter mostly for employees, but it raises the conversation across town about people who are different, who have different needs. And that, that alone is a pretty interesting concept, that it's available to pick up almost any place in town. So when we talked about, knowing that marketing is a problem, we talked about what are options for going forward. She had lots of ideas as we chatted. The one idea that we talked about was for people who have low vision or need better, larger size print. She asked whether it was possible for us to have an ebook kind of format for downloading the warrant. So somebody who's got a reading device of some kind, could be a, Kindle, could be on a computer. They could download the whole thing as an ebook and be able to enlarge the type or increase the contrast.
Sure.
That was sort of interesting.
So it's an ebook format for the digital briefing book. Interesting.
And it has to be an ebook as opposed to a
No,
PDF.
she was not specifying any kind of digital.
They all are digital right now.
They are available, she was just suggesting if somebody has a reader. I mean, we were talking about people with visual impairments who may have other devices that they're used to using.
Sure.
Could we make this available in some format that they can get on their computer, enlarge the type, or put on their Kindle or iPad or whatever they have?
Well, currently available, you could do it on an iPad. The briefing book will be a thing that you can download on an iPad. But there's money involved in putting something in a Kindle format and being able to download it on Kindle.
Kindle was not necessarily, I mean, it was
Yeah,
some kind of digital format that somebody that needs assistance in reading can access it more easily. She was suggesting that perhaps the warrant itself, in the intro pages, I know they were very meaty in the early days. I don't know if the one going online would be as dense, but in the warrant include language that reminds or lets people know that there are reasonable accommodations can be made for people with a disability who would like to attend.
Mhm.
And then we went into all kinds of ideas about
Sure.
what kinds of assistance would be available. She talked about using perhaps the COA vans and drivers to volunteer at night to do a run between, say, West Concord COA and the high school.
Sure.
I think we already have that.
Yeah, I was gonna be surprised if we don't.
Okay,
She was not aware that we have that.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I made the recommendation, so I said, oh, I thought we
Yeah.
had that, but.
Yeah.
Yeah.
and we also have an announcement in every warning we have for years. This is the number you call if you need accommodations.
Okay.
So Alice, it sounds like that was a really good conversation. It sounds like, connecting, it's interesting that the status quo is not well known. The current practice.
It's where you get it's where people go for information about this
Yeah.
stuff. So they have, on the HR website, they're piloting a translation software. So if a person's first language is not English and they're interested in applying for jobs or interested in bringing an HR issue to the town, that they can translate the page into whatever their language is. I tried it, I didn't work on my browser, and I thought I should try it again on like Google. But,
So there's an opportunity here.
Mhm.
That's great. That's great.
so that she had lots of ideas
Yeah.
of improving, and most of it is communications and marketing.
And may I add one further update? One further update is that we will have wheelchairs and walkers
That was-
available at town meeting. And I did work that out with the ADA coordinator, and she offered to do that coordination because we have them
Yep.
at the Council on Aging, and she offered to do that coordination to have them there.
She said that she had that great conversation with you to make that available.
Who was it that you spoke with from the disability?
Jean Goldsberry,
So these two folks are,
they worked together, it
Yeah.
was working with Jean Goldsberry. Is she currently the chair of the Disability Commission or past chair of Disability Commission?
She was the chair for a really, really long time, if she's not still, and she is part of,
Minutemen.
yes, Minutemen.
so I have one other question. Phil Swain raised the question that the state, a state agency, recommended a way of doing remote participation as a disability accommodation for town meeting. But Phil's reading, as well as its statute, was no, you can't do that. And so there's this tension between what one agency wrote as a recommendation and, Phil's understanding the law. And I think, Carmen, you'd mentioned that the MMA, the Massachusetts Moderators Association, was investigating that as well. Do you have any news on that, or?
We've had conversation through the MMA among moderators. There are some anecdotal individual circumstances in which moderators have made accommodations for people who were, for example, had COVID or were you know, in a body cast or recovering from surgery or whatever, and really could not, you know, physically unable, not just, I don't like to drive at night, but, you know, I'm in traction, you know, that sort of, thing. And those people have been connected by Zoom, and they've had, you know, a clerk can check them in on the Zoom screen. And then they get an assistant moderator who watches that Zoom screen and takes that person's vote. And you could see how it wouldn't be that hard to expand that to a few people on the Zoom screen, all checked in by town clerk staff and all supervised by probably the same person who would be the assistant moderator watching that Zoom screen. Gets a little more complicated just as a matter of technology and making sure that those people could speak if they wanted to, but they certainly can watch and they could vote. And, you know, I think it's absolutely correct that if you read our state law altogether, this is not allowed. But the interesting question is whether the federal law of the ADA trumps the state law. And you got a whole other separation of powers question there. And I think I mentioned I have put a question into the Attorney General's office to say, hey, your sister agency is saying this. We'd like to know if that really is our obligation. And they're not answering. And they say, consult your town.
So thank you. I think, how do we move forward on this then? Do we go back to town council and say, hey, can you give us an opinion
I mean,
from our perspective or?
I feel like in terms of best use of everyone's time, it sounds like in the cases where the extreme cases where this has happened, that people have contacted the moderator or someone and it was made happen. And I would say that we still kind of rely on that. So somebody's gonna call the number that says in the warrant. And then if they present this problem to Jess Porter, Jess is gonna work it out with the town moderator. So like, I don't feel like there's much more that this group would do, or even like, cause I feel like there's been an extensive amount already. But I do think in the report, we should, you know, put our recommendations, and I do think it's worth mentioning, like, we've come up with a lot of recommendations that have already been in place. So, even if they're recommendations, I think we should qualify them as people still want these, or we think these are still needed, and yet we have them in place somehow, so. But I mean, I would add some things to
If they're
this.
already in place, maybe just acknowledge they're in place and then
Yes,
add some new things.
yes,
Right, 'cause otherwise,
Well, so, okay, thank you. I think the thing I'd like to be confident about is that if someone contacts, first of all, you know, folks don't know to contact Jess Porter, don't know to contact Jess Porter for remote accommodation.
Well, it's on the warrant.
yeah, I mean,
I'll move it to what we can.
and I think he understands it too, right?
Yeah. Okay,
I mean, it is, honestly,
Right.
it's on, I think it's on the back cover, you know, if you need you know, there'll be all these things, if you need accommodations, here's a phone number.
Right.
And,
okay. And so I think what I hear is that, you know, Carmen, and Kristen, you're confident that somebody calls up Jess Porter and says, hey, I need remote accommodation, we'll figure it out in time.
Well, if they say this is my issue, she's gonna, I think, diagnose it and say either we can help you with it, yes, there will be wheelchairs there, so forth and so on, yes, we can get you a ride. Or I don't know how to handle this moderator, can you please?
So-
I've never spoken to
Yeah.
Jess, that's just what I imagine
Okay.
would happen in the
So-
limited time.
So I'm concluding, I'm gonna move on. What I hear is status
Get
quo.
Katie.
One second, it said status quo, we have a solution, and we don't need to make an additional recommendation around this time.
I think there's, and for that particular one about ADA remote participation accommodation, yes, that's what I
That's
think, and
right.
a number of other people think.
Eric, well, sorry, let me go to Katie, then Eric. Katie, please.
Yeah, I mean, I think to me, it sounds like the services exist. It's that people don't know they exist. So the gap here and the recommendation we can make is how to better communicate that. Obviously, it sounds like it is in some places, but people aren't looking in those places. So maybe it's thinking creatively about how this should be socialized or maybe there's not actually a need for those things if those services aren't being sought out. But to me, it sounds like the recommendation is around communication, if anything.
Okay, thank you. Eric, anything?
Yeah, I'd like to expand on the point Kristen made, which I think is an important guide for all of our work going forward, and that is there's a certain number of things where we can make a recommendation. It's an area, it's not our job to figure out all the details of how a staff, how it might be staffed or carried out.
Sure.
And similarly, as Carmen pointed out, the cost, for example, of clickers, or, you know, the way that will get handled, if we're recommending it and people think it makes sense, then the select board tasks
Sure.
the town staff to do that. And I think that there are similar things like looking for a location of where town meeting might be held or things like that, that we should keep our attention and energy moving forward on really the big picture recommendations, and we're not expected to you know, iron out all the technical issues of potential hacking on remote voting or any of them.
So I hear you. I want to bring it back to my core concern is that we have a means to accommodate people with remote participation who have disabilities. And I think it was established that we're confident we can do that. It wasn't clear to me that we could do that. You know, and I think it's an important thing that we do. We talk about accessibility for town meeting, the literal accessibility, you know, not just ease of participation, but literal accessibility. And so to me, that level of service is part of our purview. And I think we've settled that it's possible.
I guess I would go further, not
Yeah.
that it's possible, we actually have done it. It's there, I'll warrant it. Of need a ride, you need accessible seating, et cetera.
Yeah.
But we ought to acknowledge that it's happening.
Right.
If we have anything else to add, fine, but not
Well,
say it's
so
possible.
the question to Alice was, can we do better, right? Is there?
Yeah,
is there-
no,
is there
absolutely. There are other
next
things
and
that
can
can
we
be
do
done.
that?
We could have a
Yeah.
bulletized list of some things. But then, as Eric said, leave the rest up to
Good.
the staff.
Yeah, okay.
We don't have to.
I think you're right, but and the language in the federal laws is reasonable accommodations. Not every accommodation may be deemed reasonable. If it's extraordinarily expensive, it may not be reasonable for a particular agency or a town or a program to pay for whatever that accommodation is. Reasonable accommodation leaves room for negotiation.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily mean you've got the solution.
Okay.
It's a reasonable solution, and hopefully it'll work.
Yeah,
But there-
David, we're gonna move on, but please, quickly.
Thank you. A couple of items on remote, this page that has come up again, let's do it. Maybe I'm demonstrating my failure to understand, but I don't see the difference between, particularly remote, whatever the words that are used, and hybrid. First of all, second of all, the word is pretty clear from the legislature. The warrant, article and therefore the home rule petitions have got to be identical across town, not similar, but identical. But if I could get an understanding out of my dense brain, what was the point of having in that language fully remote or hybrid? Strikes me there are only two things going on, either you're in the room or you're not there.
I can tell you,
Or both.
I can tell you the answer to that. The answer to that is you can also have a meeting like this one where some of us are in the room and some of us are remote. That's hybrid.
Right, and I don't understand, are we proposing that,
My guess
town
is-
meeting might be fully
That's,
remote?
that's my guess, is that it would
Yes.
be a third option, yeah.
Yes,
So-
third option.
If I might offer an opinion, that's a bridge too far. We already face remarkable friction and resistance and pushback from the legislature. Go fully remote,
Interesting
I don't
point.
think we want to ask for that. But I'll come back here. What really matters in practical terms is getting that home rule language precisely the same across.
David, I would just say with regard to that, and, you know, we really are deliberating as a committee, and dialoguing with, but, both Representative Gentile and Senator Barrett, were of the opposite opinion. That is, that, and I think that that's further, evidenced by the fact that, Representative Cabral's committee took 8 different related things, and they crafted their own language that you know comes close. In specific instances, depending on what the political layout is, like with Alice's earlier work, that evolved to a situation where the smart political thing to do was to have every single one be verbatim the same. But that's not a universal that necessarily will be required in this instance.
So,
Good.
Can I just make a
Excuse me.
statement? I mean, we're sitting here trying to,
Yeah.
we've made our recommendation, let the folks that are gonna be talking to other towns figure that out. Why are we spending 20 minutes?
So folks, thank you, David, thank you, Eric, thank you, Parashar, we're gonna move on, point well taken, thank you. We're missing Chase, so no updates on engagement. Katie, could you comment on the survey work you're working on, please?
Yeah,
For
so
the-
I just
yeah.
started to create a draft of a post-meeting survey that we can distribute after the meeting. I started by taking what we had from last year, along with some of the information from the survey that we developed over the summer and into the fall, and kind of tried to pare down to a select few questions that we'd like to ask after the meeting concludes, and thinking about asking them in a way that's easy to analyze, since I've seen the data from various things at this point. So I kind of have narrowed it down to really things that are actionable. So things that can change based on feedback. So got rid of things like barriers to attendance, because we really know those things at this point. So just created really a first draft that I'd like to enhance more as we make some additional recommendations. So things about like around the consent calendar or other things where we're changing time components to understand feedback from the community about those specific changes. So it's really early draft form now, just has, I think, 6 or 7 questions. But we'll be distributing that maybe in the packet in the next couple of weeks, let's say, for any feedback. Could you guys hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you,
I guess I'm deafer than everybody else.
We're just bringing it up a little bit.
Yeah.
yeah.
What'd you say? No,
sorry.
you couldn't hear?
Katie,
So, thank you, Katie. I'm thinking about next steps. I mean, I'll send you some comments on what you have so far. And then, we'll put that into the package for following meeting. I guess the question's gonna be what discussion do you want, to move that forward, to bring it to conclusion? If you just follow up on that.
Yeah, I mean, I really don't think it's a good use of meeting time to spend time going through question by question. So perhaps it's, offline compilation of comments from folks who are interested to review. I do think it will need to evolve as we do make some final recommendations. So I see
Right.
it as kind of a continued work in progress.
Right, but I think it makes sense to delegate the final judgment to you, collecting comments offline. And when you're ready to sort of present it, it's done. Have that opportunity. Good, thank you.
Okay.
I have a quick thought on that. Thanks for putting that together. And I agree, with actionable items. Are you also including that kind of quantitative feedback in terms of, so we can gauge like what changes are made this year and how people feel about them?
So what I would say the only change that there are a couple changes that I know of that were for sure doing this year. One, clickers, of which I added a couple of questions about people's agreement with, how easy they were to use, that they think we should use them in the future, like a couple of questions surrounding that. I added the briefing book as a source of information and how useful people found that tool. But I think for me, there's a gap in what our recommendations are going to be, which I think will be great to hear from the next couple of meetings, what questions we can ask about those things that we are actively changing.
Good, so maybe late March then for the survey, after we get the bulk of our recommendations done. Carmen, you have something?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I might add, reactions to publication of the warrant of the Concord Bridge, and, additional, ADA accommodations that we'll be making this year.
Good, thank you. Parashar, I have you here for anything with FinCom? Any updates there? please?
Yep, so Eric and Eric Dahlberg, the chair of the FinCom, are getting together tomorrow. We'll figure out a way, he's actually not responsible for writing the report this year. The clerk is, and that's Don Kupka, so, and I know Phil is also interested in having that conversation, so.
Yeah.
Eric and I will figure out a way to provide some of our thoughts, speaking of the devil. We'll figure out a way. Oh, yes, I'm sorry. For Phil and I and Eric and Don to somehow feed our sense of how FinCom report can be made easy to digest, read well, et cetera, to FinCom. So we'll see where it goes.
Good.
Basically, he will say.
Yeah.
It's not for lack of trying, at least over the 6 years I've been there,
Yeah,
folks
yeah.
recognize it.
You
We'll
have
see
some,
what happens.
you did have some very compelling graphics. And
Right,
that is
we've added
really
some of that,
helpful.
that cover letter over the last couple of years, I think has improved.
Yeah,
But then when you get into the meat of it. You know, you gotta explain some of it in municipal finance terms.
Mhm.
Sometimes that's hard to simplify, so we'll figure out what we can do.
so Phil Swin has arrived, Eric.
7:59.
Hey, Phil, welcome, thank you.
But who's
In
counting?
case there are any votes.
You missed the most important.
Okay,
Oh,
yeah, so, all right, clickers, we have a few things to talk about with clickers tonight. So, the first item with respect to clickers is to clarify criteria for evaluating clickers' impact in town meeting. How do we know if clickers are helping? Is the question. We have a second item, which is when to use clickers, both, I think, in the time frame of, town meeting 25 and in the longer term. But this particular item here is how do we wanna, how do we gauge the impact of clickers on voters' experience at meeting? What do we look for? I think, you know, a few things came to mind for me, right? You know, preference for using them again. Or, you know, no more clickers at meeting. I'm satisfied with my use of clickers, but I have problems using clickers. You know, any subjective questions around, you know, I felt that my privacy was better or worse. I felt the temperature of meeting was better or not. How do we want to gauge how well clickers are working? I'll go around and see those things to offer here. And sorry, you know, Katie, this is to help, and you know, and concretely, it's to help inform what you're asking, what we're asking, but what you're asking in the post-meeting survey as well. Who has thoughts on this?
So I guess I'll start off, right? So clearly, I think we've heard folks want to use clickers. And I think having a survey after the first town meeting is great. But I wouldn't let that first survey dictate whether we're gonna stop clickers or not. Because as you said, Carmen, there's gonna be wrinkles the first time folks go through this. So I think spending a lot of time on the survey questions, frankly, is not worth it, in my opinion. And I think the other question I would ask, if anyone knows, we've heard a number of towns in the area have used clickers for multiple years now, I
Right.
think. Have any of them ever stopped? I'm just
Sure.
kind of curious. So that's a little bit of my thought on the evaluation criteria is, sure, ask you a couple simple questions and then repeat those questions over a couple years and kind of see what people say.
So, how do we know if clickers are helping? That's the question.
Sorry?
How do we know if clickers are helping?
Because people will tell us through the bridge and other places whether
Yeah,
they're
but
not.
Sure.
but what are the questions you would ask?
Sorry?
what are the questions?
Well, that's what I'm
you
saying,
ask?
is ask a couple of questions, I don't know what those are, but let's not boil the ocean here.
Sure.
In terms of a deep dive that goes into 10 questions.
I don't
That's
understand.
by any point.
Finger wagging, sorry.
That's
I
all.
don't want to do that, right?
Fair enough.
I don't want to, you know,
You
I
asked
wanna
what it
know how we
means.
think, you know, we talked about how our clicker is gonna help, well, you know, there's certain kinds of votes that are a lot faster. Right, you know, we know in other cases, maybe they're not much faster, maybe they're slower, than, other way in the paper kinds of votes.
Well, so my,
We also know
it's a
that,
privacy issue. To me, the privacy issue was came out first and foremost.
right, so.
And
so-
you can ask people whether they felt the use of clickers improved privacy.
That's a great question.
That's it.
Okay.
And then you can ask about time
Right,
if interested, but again, let's not pass judgment on 1 year's worth of survey.
sure,
That's what I
sure, okay. So any other comments around evaluation? Yeah, oh, sorry, Katie, I missed you. Yeah,
I agree with Parashar. I mean, ultimately, the response on the survey is so low that like, I don't even know if we could generalize much from what we hear on this, because like the likelihood of hearing people who are upset about something is high. So I wouldn't necessarily trust this post-survey as a reason to change anything. One of the questions I came up with is like, I would like to continue to use clickers at town meeting. I think that gets at people like it, people don't. We're probably going to have some neutral folks, some people who really like it. Ultimately, as Parashar said, people haven't stopped using them, that we, at least it sounds like. And I don't know that these survey questions are really going to inform moving forward unless it's just a landslide of people who don't like it. Then maybe we could reconsider.
so bottom line, would you use clickers again? And that's all we really need to ask.
How about if the moderator just asks at the end of, in addition to the survey?
Yeah.
But at the end of the meeting, the moderator just asks, how'd you like the clickers?
Do we raise our hands or do we use the question?
The motion for that.
I think that's a great
That's
idea.
great. No, that's awesome. Yeah, that works.
I mean, so the only caution that I have with the clickers, the only reason that we were trying to get, feedback is because they are an expense. And so when we say, do people want them? Sure. Do people want a lot of things in town? Yes, we do. And so at what point do we say, you can have that, you can have that, you can have that, you can have that? And then people raise their hand like, we need to be more fiscally responsible. And then it comes out like, well, it only costs 15,000 or something. So I'm not making a judgment on the cost of these or others, but when we say, here's an option where, we have a system that works. Is it more important that we, have private votes? And this is where we want to invest money, knowing that, it's a finite amount of time, we're gonna have to replace the clickers and so forth, so much time. And people say, yep, that's where we're gonna spend our money. And then I really think it's important that when the select board and folks work on the budget, they say, these are the things you prioritize, privacy and some other things. And these are some of the things that are now on the back burner as a result. And again, I realize it's a small amount of money. Everything's a small amount of money until we add it all up.
Sure.
And I don't think this is just about money by any means. It's about privacy, which is what we heard. And I hear this committee being very responsive, and I hear moderators saying, I don't have any problems with it, so I think that's great. I did hear other people express concern that this was gonna change the kind of the culture of town meeting, and I wanna acknowledge that. But I do wanna just make sure that when we say to people, did you like clickers, you wanna use them next year, and everybody's like, yeah, I'm like, okay, go, put $1 in the pot on your way out, or whatever it is.
Sure. Sure.
Eric, I'm gonna ask something.
I'm sorry. Yeah,
Thanks. Just following up on that, the two questions that I think could potentially be worth asking. One is tying the use of the clickers to money, to ask people, do you agree or disagree that using the clickers is worth the expenditure of this, annually? And that allows people to tell you what their cost benefit judgment is. And the other one is, you're asking people, if you just ask them, would you use them again? You know that all the yeses are people who say, this made it better for me and I like this. The no's could be people for whom it made it worse, a worse experience, or it could be people who don't really care but don't wanna spend the money, right? And so I might wanna have a question to ask people, did it take away from their experience with that meeting to have the clippers? Or did it compromise the feeling of the meeting for you?
Right.
And I think it's important to know
So,
whether people felt that way, and if so, how many people?
so do clickers make meeting better, worse, or the same for you? Simple question.
Yeah.
And you're suggesting possibly that, you know, if we spend X on clickers, you think they're worth it?
Yeah.
Which, okay.
Wait, that concept that you give a pot of money, is it worth 50,000 a town meeting? 30,000 a town meeting? 20,000 a town meeting? So
Yeah.
you get, where's
we're
your
gonna-
threshold?
We know
We're
it
gonna
costs
ask that
that.
question for everything that we're recommending.
Yeah.
I mean, at the end of the day, like, we're an advisory body making recommendations. We've got professional staff, we've got elected officials that are responsible for managing the budget, and if 15,000 is too much and the citizens wanna cut it back elsewhere, let them decide. Why are we sitting here trying to micromanage the individual line items and the cost of the recommendations we're making? I just, we're overthinking this, I think, my personal opinion.
I very much agree, and I think if you just reflect on the way the select board responded to our recommendation. It wasn't in the budget. They do have a budgeted amount for town meeting, but they said, this is a good idea. Town manager, in fact, you got a $40 million budget, find the right amount. And I don't think it's our job to sort of look at what's the budget for town meeting and then decide, well, it'll be this amount for that function. And you know, that's just way
But we're
down in
not,
the
right?
weeds.
But we're not. I think we're asking, how do we know if clickers made a good difference or not? So,
That makes sense. I'm not sure I agree asking them, do you think it was worth $15,000?
That's exactly right.
So I'll
I
be
get
the
it.
devil's advocate for a minute, okay, because the town manager says, we do not have this money in the budget. And if we have some numbers back now, Molly can tell you what they are, they're big, okay, they're big for this, bigger than we anticipated. And so the town manager said, you know, if we do this for all 3 nights, we are gonna have to cut something else.
So
And
that's,
so
that's just
people
not
can
true. So that's,
question-
that's not what happened, and that's not what. So I apologize for interrupting, but I would like to set the record straight if I could. So
well,
there,
you know what, that is what happened in an email with Carrie, so, you may not know that.
so what, well, at last night's meeting, just to set the record straight, and I apologize for interrupting.
sorry, and Cameron, you're Cameron McKenna speaking, so.
Yes,
Yeah.
I apologize, but at last night's meeting, we went through. There is $33,000 that has been set aside in ARPA funds for clickers. So I just want to be clear on that. The initial estimates that came back said that to lease the clickers, to lease 1,300 clickers would cost, I think it was $18,000 or something like that.
Yeah, 18.5.
Okay. If we were to scale that number back from 1,300 to 800, that would be, you know, or 1,000, that would be, you know, obviously less, right, than $18,000. And there are vendors who will apply that as sort of a, you know, lease to own or rent to own type of thing. So I won't opine on my opinions on the clickers because I'm not part of the committee. I just want to make sure that we have the record straight on there is 33,000 available that would probably cover more, you know, 2 years worth of leasing or some sort of lease to own type of program. So.
Okay, so I have an email that was sent to myself and Eric today at 2:47 PM. In which the town manager says, given that any expense over 10,000 this year requires us to cut another planned expense. Perhaps the best approach this year is to see if we can all generally agree to use the clippers 1 night only versus all 3.
So, so rather than going back and forth on this, I want to come to closure.
Eric,
Well,
sorry,
I just
Phil.
wanna say, I agree with Parashar and Eric. That we shouldn't be dealing with these details, whether it's 18,000 or 33,000 or
Yeah.
$40 million. that's the professional's responsibility, not our responsibility. And nor is it the town meeting attendees' responsibility. It's just, we make the recommendation and they find the money or they don't. But whether it's 10,000 or 18 or 33, we shouldn't be debating it.
Yeah, I want to get us out of the weeds. So, thank you. Katie, quick comment?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think we're definitely getting into the weeds, and I actually don't think the survey is a place to start noting prices, because without context around any of these items, it'll just lead to confusion and most people won't have any idea what that cost is in relation to other things. I think it's asking a few specific questions and using expert judgment once those results come in to make an informed decision about next year, with all the information. Maybe that's with the select board, maybe the moderator, but I think it's just us to make recommendations and ask a couple good questions.
Good, thank you. So we can look at Clicker's impact on meeting in terms of time saved, or not. And, you know, we can look at Clicker's impact in terms of do people feel improve their meeting or not. And so I think we can come to closure on this question. So the next one, right, is recommended practice for when to use clickers during town meeting. We talked about this in late November, but we didn't take a vote on it. And I think in going back and looking at the video, I think we had different points of view about it. I think, some of us have also as well expressed a desire to come back and look at this. So I think we need to pick it up. I think there are two timeframes for recommendation, however. I think, and this, Carmen, goes back to the communication with Carrie Fleur, the town manager, around how we look at clickers for town meeting 25. What do we want to get out of that in the near term? And then the question as well is, for longer term, do we want to make a recommendation about how clickers are used if needed? I think, it's a recommendation, something we make as a starting point for the moderator, under the moderator's discretion or the meeting's discretion, as to how clickers are used, or do we want to look to some sort of a policy, not a bylaw, but some sort of a policy that well, I don't know how that would be embodied otherwise. So what's the form of recommendation, and what recommendation do we want to make, is the question. What we talked about, and I'll come back to you, Phil. What we talked about in October, there's a place for secret ballots. It should be easy for secret ballots. Clickers make it easy. We didn't, go further than that in terms of do we leave it to a rule meeting or whatever. I see, three options and then other, so to speak, as a starting point. I'll read through these, and then we'll talk. Do we recommend to the moderator to continue the current practice? Relying on a motion debate for a secret ballot with, the idea that if clickers are there, that makes it a lot easier. Do we recommend using clickers routinely for votes on motions to approve articles from the warrants? Do we use clickers as much as possible, even if the raised paper slips might be faster or other? And the town meeting 25 question, if we're conscious of the budget, then we can make an argument to look at clickers as sort of an evaluation to understand what impact they do have on the meeting, what people think. Or we can go all in and go, look, we're not going to think about the budgetary questions and really just say what's right for meeting in terms of use of clickers. So that's my introduction to this. How would we like to start discussion? I'm going to go to Phil first. Eric, I know you have a pretty extensive chunk in the packet, so we'll come back to you as well. But let me go around.
Mine is short. I think it should be a tool for the moderator to use at his or her discretion. And we shouldn't go beyond recommending, we shouldn't recommend any specific instances when clickers should be used.
So that would be A then, in other words, in this list here. Katie, I want to come to you because I think in a previous meeting, you had some questions about a policy.
Me?
Yeah.
Sorry, I wasn't sure. I think I'm between myself, B and C. I think if we're paying for clickers, we should use the clickers. I think switching back and forth is confusing. And I think leaving it up to judgment around each specific item can get confusing and lead to criticism potentially. So I say if we're spending money on them, we should use them as much as possible, if not always.
Okay, thank you. Parashar?
Yeah, so I think we should go with B. It's 2025. I understand the use of hand ballots and everything else has been going on for 200 and what odd number of years, but let's get real. There's an easy way to give folks privacy. Other towns have been using it and more are gonna be adopting it, no doubt. Why are we wasting time and energy discussing these minutiae details? If we have them, use them routinely. Folks talking about there's a process for a secret ballot. So think about the scenario. Folks are like, yeah, somebody's like, well, I'm not sure I wanna publicly vote on this, so I'm gonna ask for a secret ballot. That in itself gives away the privacy and it adds more time and complexity. Just go straight with the clickers. Leaving it to the discretion of moderators, again, raises the potential for controversy, as Katie said. Make it routine, straightforward, you move on. And the last point is, everybody, I understand town meeting is a legislative body. But we're not legislators. My vote does not need to be public, because I'm not running against anyone else the next time. If we stick to that analogy, we should all gather on the second Tuesday or first Tuesday of the presidential election of the governor and all raise our ballots for the different candidates. I mean, we don't do that. There's a reason for that. So I don't think using the same analogy is appropriate for when we go into town meeting. I mean, so that's my opinion. We should go with B and just move forward and not look back.
Good, thank you. Kristen? I recall, if I may, you voted against using clickers, so,
I did.
yeah.
And in terms of forming a consensus for this body, if the recommendation is to move ahead with clickers, then yes, I would agree with using them all the time.
Alice?
So, given our last conversation, I wouldn't go with A, and the reason is that I would give that discretion to the moderator. The moderator can choose A, B, C, or D, depending on town meeting. If the third night of town meeting has 20 people there, no reason to have to use clickers. I think discretion, the moderator has a great deal of control over the evening. And I think this falls within that purview without having to be dictated to how often and when to use clickers. So I would, and maybe the moderator should weigh in, I just gave her responsibility for it.
They should only be used on secret ballots, and that's not the way I feel, and I don't think that's the way Alice feels. It should be the discretion of the moderator.
Yeah.
Whether it's somebody's asked for a secret ballot or not, it's just what's best for this particular vote. If it's the vote for the municipal bathrooms, that nobody's gonna vote on, then she can just say, we'll do a raise your hand. But, she can use her, or he can use their discretion depending on whether they think the vote is appropriate or not just when there's a secret ballot.
Good, okay, we'll come back to that because I suspect there's a procedural issue with that. Keith Bergman, I see your hand up, please.
Yes, I'd recommend B, using clickers routinely. Since the town administration is moving forward to make sure that there are clickers available, I think we'd like this to be a valid test of whether it works for us or not. And so I think the standard of routinely using the clickers is the appropriate one to go forward with. Thanks.
Thank you. Eric and Lynn, one last. Thank you.
Thank you. First, I think we should keep in mind, unless town meeting reverses the moderator, whether and how much to use it is the moderator's discretion. Having said that, what we're talking about is what's our committee's recommendation to the moderator, which the moderator can accept or decline or fuzz. I believe our recommendation to the moderator should be to use it routinely, regularly, always.
What by always? What do you mean by always?
Well, I struggled a bit to figure out your difference between B and C, routinely versus always. Versus.
So routinely, right, is.
But if I could just continue the
okay,
because So here's 4 reasons, not in stuff that I wrote in my previous memo. First, at last night's select board meeting, at least 3 of the select board members I heard say, you know, if we're like spending this money, I hope we'll use it regularly, use it a lot, not just, you know, maybe every now and then. Second, I believe that the savings, by like cutting it to one night, that the economics don't really work that way. I mean, as Carmen said last night to the select board, the 18,000 number assumes 1,300 voters. If you cut back to 1,000, and one, I wasn't sure whether the brand that Carlisle uses, where they are
Meridian,
their Meridian, whether that wasn't that the lowest of the 3
yes,
of the 3. So we have a neighboring town that has, given the numbers, we're gonna go a low bid, it's the only thing that makes sense. And Carlisle is already crafted an agreement on how they would lend
yeah,
clickers to a nearby town. So in the cost of clickers, a huge component is setting it up the first time. It's the personnel component to come in, put it all there, test it, retest it, and then the takedown at the end. So whether you use it one night or 3 nights, it's not gonna be a 1/3.
well,
You just
to be clear, we don't know what the quote would be, I think to provide a little bit of context, right? We have those quotes, the quotes for a certain amount for 3 nights. The question that came, to us, that came to me, was, you know, when can we decide how we want to use clickers? Because we have a lease decision gating on whether we want to use them a little bit at this town meeting or for all of them. So, you know, I think the correct thing for us to do is to see, in general, how do we want to use clickers? And then to come back to the narrow time frame, right? So,
And the point I'm making is that I think we should use them routinely. And again, 71 towns, the Mass Moderators Association, chapter and verse, 71 towns. And last and foremost, the privacy consideration is the one that is compelling.
mhm,
And if you're only private half the time or 3/4 of the time, you're not really addressing the privacy issue the way it was articulated in the 60 pages of comments of town employees that didn't feel comfortable coming, parents of school kids who were worried about repercussions, all of those kinds of things. And then you add to that, as Katie and others have said, just sort of the confusion of, well, we're gonna do it this time or not that time. So I'm a strong advocate for our recommending to the moderator that we use them routinely.
good.
And by the way, by routine, thought it would be all the time. That was my definition.
You thought it was what?
It was all the time.
Yeah,
that's
that's
so,
what-
yeah.
So let me apologize for my imprecision in language. What I mean by routinely is if, you know, if we're voting on an article, right, Article 8, we use clickers for the vote on the motion for Article 8. And, you know, if it's a call to question kind of motion, maybe we don't use clickers for that. So
That's one where you need 2/3, so it's better
It's just, yeah, exactly.
to have it there. and-
So then I think the way that you are interpreting routinely is if there's a vote, it's clickers.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can I ask a clarifying question? The decision that we're making tonight on the use of clickers is a 1-year decision. It is not in perpetuity. This is a,
I think it's a
flying this out. And I'm just trying to figure out what
These
we're
are the
saying.
findings of this committee, we
Right.
heard that there's a need for privacy, this is this is one way to address
And a
that.
need for speed. Yeah.
But I don't think there's any validation that it's faster, but I mean, I don't think that's why we're doing it, because it's faster, I think we're doing it for privacy, and I would put that in the report. And then that report is for future moderators to have.
And Matt, personally, why are we doing this for 1 year?
Well, but that's
Well,
the
we're gonna-
question.
No, I know, and I'm just telling you my personal opinion.
Well, we budget 1 year at a time,
Well,
right?
okay, but again, we're not looking at the budget, with all due respect for 3 years from now, we've got other folks doing that.
So,
We're making a set of recommendations. The privacy seems to be the driver, at least it is for me personally. And at the end of the day, privacy is not gonna change next year. It's 2025. How many towns are doing it right now? How many more? are gonna-
71, but put another way, if at the end of town meeting 2025, all sorts of people said in a survey, it's really terrible, it diminished the quality of the meeting, it took more, next year's moderator could say, well, we tried it, but it really didn't work well.
well,
But I think we all know,
Right.
I think we'd all be pretty
Right.
shocked,
Right.
to put it mildly.
So our formal recommendation was clickers may improve at town meeting, right? And we cited, I think we cited privacy is one concern or one benefit. We also cited, if you need to have an accurate count, clickers are way better. We want to have a secret ballot, clickers are way better, right? So it may improve. We're not having secret ballots and having counts. The only benefit of clickers is ostensibly an improvement in privacy. So I'm not disagreeing with you, but it's more than just privacy for clickers. And we didn't put a time window on that. Then it sounds as though the motion that, well, let me give Carmen, do you have any comments?
Question, on non-substantive motions, for example, rule of the meeting stuff that happens up front, or, no new business after 10 o'clock or 9:30 or whatever it is. Do you see those as, votes that would require privacy? Because, my perception of those kinds of votes is that they're like this, they're almost always like unanimous, and the hands go up, the hands go down, and on we go, and it's way faster than everyone getting out their clicker and saying like, okay, now we're all gonna open the window now, and everyone's got 20 seconds, and we're gonna wait for the 20 seconds to count down, and okay, the window's now closed, and then, okay, let's display the vote. That's 5 times as long as it takes to just put your paper ballots up. And I feel the same way about calling the question, which is almost never a difficult vote to call. I will say that the very first town meeting I ran, I made the rookie mistake of counting one of those votes because I couldn't tell, but which I would never do again. And because if there's doubt, keep talking.
So this is why it should be at the discretion of the moderator, and if the moderator were to ignore the clickers, that would be the last year that moderator is elected.
Yeah,
We elect them every year, so we shouldn't be nitpicking how the moderator handles the votes. We've said this is a good tool, let's let the moderator do it, and if they go against the will of the people, they won't get elected again.
Yeah, thank you. Katie, please.
Yeah, I guess to comment maybe on that specific scenario, in general, I agree. We're providing a guidance for Carmen and future moderators, I think, to use as they wish, not a policy. When it's just getting a sense of how the meeting is before taking a vote, I think it's fine to use raising the paper slips as long as we don't think that's going to be confusing to people about which way we're voting. If we think it's a time saver to raise a slip of paper, it's not controversial, maybe it's not the official vote for the warrant article, and it won't be confusing, then I think that would be a fine scenario to do, to raise a paper slip. But yeah, it gets subjective.
So does this, thank you, Katie. So does this capture the motion that we might want to vote on? To use clickers as much as is practical?
I think that orders it. I would urge Mr. Chairman that we at least have a vote. two points of view have been articulated. One is that it ought to be routinely used, by which those of us who are using those mean basically all the time. And the other would be at the moderator's discretion, which would certainly leave it up to Carmen next year for this to decide each time.
So, okay, I want to have a vote, but I don't know what we're voting on. And what you just suggested.
Our recommendation to the moderator.
No, I mean, I want to know what the motion is going to be.
So I'll make the motion, how's that? And then we can go and see what happens. Make a motion that the committee puts in its recommendation that clickers be used routinely for votes on motions. That just changed on me, right?
Oh, sorry.
Trick
Go
question.
ahead.
How about, Patricia, that clickers should be used as much as practical, that's your motion.
No, that's not my motion. I wanted B as my motion.
Oh.
That's where I was going.
All right, sir.
So routinely for votes, no, routinely I think is what we had all before. We didn't qualify, did we? What was the original?
But that,
Was that what the original was?
yeah,
And motions to approve articles from the warrant? That was the original?
yeah.
Okay, then that is my motion.
So that's the motion, to use clickers routinely for votes and motions to approve articles from the warrant. And routinely is understood to be as much as is practical.
All the time. I mean, why are we, and this is,
Yeah.
you know, just, I pull out my credit card to go pay gas. I mean, it's the one method all the time. I'm not used
I don't
to
I
it.
think it's trying to convey the intent.
And articles, the language you suggested, article, to use it for voting on articles on the warrant,
Yes, that was the
that
original,
would,
right?
that does not require the moderator in a preliminary vote on no new business after 9 o'clock or whatever.
Or even-
waive the reading, those are not warrant article, substantive warrant.
Or even a motion to call the question, is not, article on the warrant.
Right.
So that would leave it up to, again, the moderator to decide it's
Yeah.
2/3.
And even if we make the recommendation, the moderator is going to figure out what to do with it. So it doesn't, I don't believe that any moderator has to do word for word what is in a recommendation of our.
Yeah.
Well, the moderator doesn't have to accept. any
Exactly, right.
recommendations.
So I wanna make
Under
sure we don't spend
discretion.
too much time on this. I think as long as we capture the intent of what we're trying to convey, then
Right.
anybody who comes and reads this afterwards, you know, should be able to make a decision based on, you know, our intent.
So this is our motion.
You
And is there-
made it, we can do a second.
Yeah, I made it.
Yeah.
So somebody needs to.
So.
Second.
Okay. Good, second noted. Let me ask, in terms of discussion, is this sufficiently clear for you as a moderator?
Yeah, it's sufficiently clear to me.
Okay. Okay, let's go around then and vote. If we're ready. Well, any more discussion? Any citizen comment? Go ahead, David.
What hasn't been said around this table tonight, but has been said certainly outside of this particular group regards this matter of privacy. Town meeting is a place where the whole point is to come together and express differences in views. That's what democracy really is all about, to resolve differences. Forget about whether we're really legislators or what, and so forth. If we're not going to express our views, we might as well just go to the poll and make a vote. Why have a discussion if we are not going to express our views? So that this discussion that suggests that privacy somehow is appropriate at this meeting is fundamentally misplaced. And it is a mistake of this committee to recommend it. It is a failure of this committee to recommend it. And you can be sure that there will be wide discussion in town on this point of view. Thank you very much.
Good, thank you.
Can I just address that? I don't think clickers mean you can't debate and air your views. The votes are there.
I can't understand what you're saying.
I said, I don't think clickers preclude people from discussing their viewpoints. and having a conversation at town meeting. The
But
clickers are
it does-
can I?
Please, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Clickers at the end are simply, after all the debate, whoever wants to stand up and talk, they can air their views, we can all do that. At the end of it, we vote. It's the vote and the privacy attached to the vote is what the clickers are seeking to address.
And indeed, that means that the set of folks who came there not to express their views are not participating in the democratic process. And we are perverting the actions of town meeting by doing that.
Thank you. Any other discussion?
One final point, if I might, there are 201 towns in Massachusetts. That means 130 towns do not use clickers. And this business about waving a technology around that there are 70 towns who adopted it is asking that we join a herd. Well, the herd is 130 towns who do not use clickers. Okay?
Yeah, thank you. We'll move to a vote then. The motion is to use clickers routinely for votes on motions to approve articles from the warrant. Keith Bergman, please.
Aye.
Katie Bresnick, please.
Aye.
Kristen Haggerty, please.
No,
Alice Kaufman, please.
No,
Eric Moore. Aye. Parashar Patel.
Aye.
Phil Swain, please.
I support clickers, but I'm gonna vote no on this motion.
now we have to start counting.
So
So now we have to start counting.
Chase Thompson not present, Eric Van Loon.
Aye.
Okay, so the noes were, Kristen Haggerty.
It's 6-3, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
As the minute taker.
Well, it can't be 63 because Chase is not here.
Well, there were 3 no's.
3 no's, 5.
5 to 3.
Me,
yeah.
Alice and Kristen.
Good.
My end. Check. 5 to 3.
Good. Can, one of the noes, take responsibility for, just a dissenting statement? So for our report?
In the report, right?
Yeah, for the report, yeah.
I think we'd have different opinions about why we're
Yeah.
voting no.
Yeah, but
Whether
we
have
will,
to have
we
a
will
dissenting
get all of
statement.
this in there, I think,
Yeah, I'd like to capture the dissenting views, please.
So you want all 3?
Yeah, please.
Or get together and talk and maybe you could agree.
Good,
That is
okay.
a meeting, a subcommittee of the meeting.
So thank you. Carmen, so given this vote, do we need to provide more information to the town about, our beliefs around clickers for town meeting 25?
You mean, in terms of like getting it out there as information from the public that we're gonna have.
No,
clickers?
for Carrie's decision-making timeline.
Well, we'll let Carrie know what we've decided, and my understanding is that a decision has to get made in the, by the middle of February latest in order to secure clickers for leasing, according to the vendors, to make sure that they will be available to us. But I still actually wanna talk with Amalia some more about the possibility of purchasing it, and in the unlikely event the town says, we hate these things, returning them, but that's
yeah.
that's an in the weeds
That's not correct.
conversation.
Yeah.
Leave the tag out.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, exactly.
I keep-
I wish everybody, you know that tag on your mattress, do not take it off, because we may say
Eric,
that.
I think you're misinterpreting the vote. At least for me, I wasn't saying we shouldn't get clickers and have them available at the meeting. I think they should be.
Yeah.
The reason I said against this, because I don't think we should be handcuffing the moderator about how they should use them.
I'm not, yeah, I agree with you.
But I don't think
Yeah.
Alice or Kristen thinks that either. I think we should, I mean, the direction to the town manager is get the clickers.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then it's just how much advice we want to give the moderator.
Right,
That's all.
Or what recommendations, knowing the moderator can
right.
choose not to accept the recommendation.
Yeah, that's right. If the moderator chooses, then the moderator won't be elected again next year.
And-
So I think it will be anyway.
And may I raise a
Go
question
ahead.
also,
Yeah. Keith will come back to you 1 second, all right?
Oh, sorry, Keith. I certainly do, as the moderator, no question, have the authority to, direct the means of voting. It's part of my ability to regulate the proceedings. But it's certainly still open to anybody on the floor of town meeting to make a motion to fix the manner of voting in a way that's different from what I said. And that, that, for example, a motion for a secret ballot is that kind of motion. Whatever we decide here about how we're going to use clickers at the meeting, not everyone is going to agree with the decision. We have different points of view here in the room. And so one question is whether we should just start off with the vote and have the select board frame a rule of the meeting that this is what we're gonna do with the clickers, and we just vote on it and then move on. That is one way to do it, rather than announce it and then have a motion from the floor and you could end up with multiple motions from the floor for, for multiple articles, not this one, right? So it's just an interesting question, right? So I raised that I'm interested in your
Could
thoughts.
someone move to say, I move not to use clickers for this?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so, it's still within the rules and anyways. The moderator can control this
Done
with the
with the
media.
recommendation, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
but,
Although if we have a rule of the meeting, technically, I think that's a motion for reconsideration. If someone wants to change the rule of the meeting. And we have a bylaw on reconsideration, and you gotta have new facts, something different that is different now than it was when we voted that rule of the meeting. And you have to be able to articulate what that different thing is. So it might be that such a motion would get ruled out of order.
But I think the reconsideration, actually, you have to make it within 5 minutes of the previous vote. So, or some number of minutes.
Not
So,
in
guys-
not in Concord town meeting time or if
I
you
thought
look at the
there's a-
little,
I know this very well, Ned Perry knows this very well too.
I wrote the
That
green
motion
pamphlet.
for reconsideration. You have to make it within a certain number of minutes of the vote that you're asking to be reconsidered. So if it's a rule of the meeting, you can't move to, and that happens at the beginning of the meeting, 10 minutes later, you can't change it.
so we're in the weeds, guys, I don't wanna.
Yes, we're in the weeds, I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's okay, thank you. Keith, I wanna recognize you quickly, please.
Yeah, looking at my screen here, I guess I'm concerned that what I thought I voted on is that that the committee voted to recommend to the moderator that clickers be used routinely, and I'm hearing somehow that it's thought that this is a decision that we've made. We don't have the authority to make the decision. So I hope our vote at least reflects that all we did is make a recommendation to the moderator.
Yeah.
Yeah.
that's the way the minutes read, by the minute.
Thank you.
So recommend the use.
Here, can I just ask a clarifying question?
Right,
Because, Howard, can you explain, you said, so if nothing else happens and we just deliver the recommendation, right? What would you do at the opening of town meeting? Because you
Well-
said something about anybody can make a motion to change the
Yeah,
vote.
so I will do one of two things. I will either ask the select board to move a rule of the meeting that says exactly this recommendation.
Yeah.
Or I will follow your recommendation, which would leave it open to somebody on the floor to move to do something different.
And so would that happen, move to do something different? Is that at the beginning of the meeting, it stays in force, or can people make motions and move to make motions for each article? Do you see what I'm asking?
Oh, yeah, it depends on how the motion's framed.
Depends on whatever motion the select board or you come up with, is that what you mean?
Well, no, I mean, if I dictate how we're gonna do voting at the meeting.
Yeah.
For example, if someone moves for a vote by secret ballot,
Mhm.
it's only on that article and it
Okay.
pertains to that article.
Yeah.
So theoretically, that motion could be made for every
For
article
every
that we take up to discuss.
Yeah.
So,
Okay,
Okay, good.
but it depends on how, it is also open to somebody to make a motion that we take every vote on the, a vote on every article on the warrant by secret ballot.
sure,
So that's framed differently, so,
I see.
yeah.
So I wanna, ask the question again, Carmen, and Amalia, does Carrie have the information that she needs at this point from us to make her decision?
Well, she will learn what the recommendation is.
Good.
And that, I think, is important for her in making, the judgment
Right.
about, cost, because, as Eric noted, 3 members of the select board last night said, geez, if we spend all this money, I sure hope the media can actually use these things.
Yeah.
And I think that Carrie has that feeling as well.
But yeah, to be clear, there's no contingency in this recommendation.
No, yeah, no, I'm
Good.
not seeing any.
Good, okay, good, thank you. Moving forward, and watching the time as well. The report, I think, we're gonna have to come back to this question, but I wanna raise the question, which is that, this committee, it's a year-long committee, we, each of us has a belief, in our mission. And I think, an intention for what impact, we wanna have, through our work for town meeting. How we want to serve the town through our work. We've been doing it all along, right? But I think when we think about the, report as, one of the artifacts that we leave behind, the question is, what do we want to put into the report? What job do we want the report to do? So that, I think, I won't get into that now, but I think I'd like to come back in our next meeting. And for folks to be pretty clear about that. Nuts and bolts questions about the report, and Carmen, you may have some opinions quickly about this as well. What audiences for the report? I have a few slides on this. I think just Carmen's sketch about the timeline suggests that basically by May 1st, we want to have a report ready for the printer. Working backwards means, I think we want to be yeah. So other questions are on report structure, what's a list of recommendations and impacts that will go into the report, and ultimately who will write up what. I think in the time that we have left tonight, I'd like to go through and raise the questions and see what our initial thoughts are, and then come back and lead with the report for our next meeting. So what audiences for the report? I see, and I'm looking for dissenting views, but in terms of the principles, right, the folks that we're making recommendations to, the moderator, the select board, town staff, the town meeting coordinator, as it were, other folks in town staff, and also the finance committee is one of the central boards leading hearings, and the FinCom report. So those are the principles that I see. I think in the work of our committee, I think, we've seen that the town meeting study committee report from 96, was it? Was, yeah, well, we read the document very carefully several times. The reports from other committees as well, and I think that, other and future town meeting study committees are potentially a valid audience for our report. When we think about the casual reader, Chase is not on tonight, but let's say Chase, for example, or Chase and his dad's group, folks who town meeting, what is that? And this is what town meeting is about. I think that I think is a reader for our work, perhaps, and certainly the critical reader. The folks who are already invested in town meeting, the folks who come and really care about how we lead town meeting. So these are the audiences that I see. Is there an audience here that doesn't belong in our report that we might want to look at in a collateral sense? What do you see in terms of audiences for the report? And Carmen, I think I'll lead with you in terms of audiences that you think matter in terms of, as our point of authority. Where do you see our audiences?
This looks like a good list to me.
I'm sorry?
Looks like a good list to me.
Yeah.
I concur, except I think the most important is the last one. People the town, the voters in the town. This isn't just for the moderator or for the select board, it's for the town. We're telling the town how they should run the town meeting.
And I would actually combine the last two, it's the citizens of the town, regardless
Yeah.
of whether they're
Right.
critical or casual, that ought to be number one. And then the principles, and frankly, I don't view other town meetings as our audience. If they get something out of our report, great, but we're not here to do their legwork.
It's an incidental benefit.
Exactly,
All the reports we've had the benefit of reading were not done for us.
yeah, and so if they get a benefit out of it, great, but that's not our audience, our audience are the voters.
The voters, good. Other comments about this? Yeah, Eric.
I think, of course, we hope everybody in the town, it's for all the citizens. But a number, at a big picture level, remote voting, electronic voting, things like that, that will make its way through to the general public. A number of our specific recommendations are really from the select board to the moderator, if we make recommendations on what days of the week it should be, or whether we start at 6:30 and we're in by 9, stuff like that. I think if we tried to explain everything to Chase's dad's group, whose first question is, what's town meeting? We'd have an infinite number of pages and we wouldn't really do the job that we're here to do, which is to recommend to the people who are working, structuring, and trying to improve the experience with the collateral effect that we hope that it will really translate into more people coming, more people enjoying, a better experience.
So, I think I'm feeling a little contrary, right? Which is that, is there something that we can do with the report that helps that 90% that doesn't pay attention to town meeting show up or
Yes.
find it interesting?
You start with the recommendations.
Yeah.
And it's one step, well, let's not forget this, right, to help the 90, we've got some ideas in there that we and others are gonna have to execute.
Right.
This report shouldn't carry the burden of doing all of that.
Okay, good, very good.
And there are already very good resources explaining what is town meeting. The stuff that Carmen hands out every town meeting. And other resources that are easily referenced or even copied into the report if you want.
So complementary or collateral resources.
Yes.
Katie, I saw your hand.
Yeah, I was just gonna say the people who don't know about town meeting aren't going to read this report probably. So I think it should be just generic to people of the town, and really we need to reach people in other ways, which sounds like the engagement committee, because the current materials aren't working, because those people aren't coming to town meeting, they're not getting those things or don't know to look it up. But that is not the purpose of this report. I think our recommendations will help support those, bringing those people into the fold.
Good, thank you.
An observation.
Kristen and the comment, please.
I mean, I think the report was in response to some complaints or feedback or something about town meeting, right? And I think ultimately you said, well, it's been 30 years since we looked at town meeting, let's do it again. And so I think that the, recommendations should, be focused around, this is what we're gonna keep about town meeting. This is what we don't want to change. And then these are the other things that we're trying to do to be responsive to folks, so that when people come and complain after the meeting, it wasn't representative, things like that. Well, actually, we just kind of looked at this, or we have something to go back on that says, we hear what you're saying, here's some information, that's more recent than previously, but I do think because otherwise, why do we do this? We clearly found that a lot of recommendations are exactly what they found 30 years ago. We're not, pulling anything out unless we do something drastic with, meeting time, place and things like that. So I think that's kind of what, and we'll talk more about the report next time, but I do think it's for the citizens, but particularly the ones that say, oh, this town meeting stuff, it's, it's being voted by 500 people, blah, 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 so.
Good, thank you. Carmen?
I wonder if it's useful to consider not only the intended audiences of the report, but the purpose of the report.
Mhm.
And one of the purposes is to reaffirm what we value about town meeting. Another is to acknowledge the shortcomings of town meeting and make recommendations on how to address those shortcomings. And maybe there are others that you consider as well, but I certainly see those two. And I guess I would say that with respect to the citizenry in general, whether they come to town meeting or not, being an audience here, you know, we hope that they can be an audience based on how the report is written, right? So that you just want to make sure that the language of the report is in ordinary language that is not, it's not an acronym or some kind of professional speak, and it contains the kinds of explanations that you want to have, you know, everything that, you know, any of you were confused about at any point, like, what's that? You want to make sure there's some explanation of that in your report.
So actually Chase's dad's group is not, exempting Simon Cataldo, Chase's dad's group is a pretty good target audience and
Well,
that
just a
sense.
chance to make sure it's readable for them,
Yeah,
not that we're doing it for them,
no.
but that they
Yeah.
can read it and get it.
Yeah.
If they can be persuaded to read it.
Yeah.
Now.
So we've
Chase,
just,
Chase is gonna distribute it to everyone in his dad's group.
sorry, Chase, I know you're not here, so we're picking on you. So the timeline, again, roughly due for printing May 1st. Working backward, really February, we want to finish our recommendations and analysis. You know, it's gonna bleed into March, no question. I'd like in March for us to do some public outreach with our recommendations and find out, you know, folks, we'll see if people engage or not, but I think we should have some form of outreach by mid-March to test our recommendations with folks who haven't already seen them. Because I don't wanna, like, you know, finish the report and then give it to the public and have the public go, but wait a minute. So, and so that means that, you know, really April, I think, focus in really getting this thing written and edited and assembled. Again, with a deadline for print of around May 1st, going to the printer, but then again, spending time in May, again, presenting, maybe it's another League of Women Voters thing. Working on, again, outreach, and communication in May. Really rough timeline, but that says not a lot of time for more recommendations. Yeah, Eric.
The one thing that I worry about it, writing in April, and we've got the school vacation, we've got the 250th, we've got Easter, we've got,
Yeah,
I mean, a lot of people. I don't think I'm the only one that's gonna not have a lot of time for
sure.
writing in April. So that says to me that we should really parse things out and be starting. So I think some parts of it we could write right now.
Yeah.
You know, begin, divide things up, start it, and maybe with an April 1 deadline goal for a first draft.
Okay, let's come back to that. I see we're just about at 9 o'clock. I want to go to Katie Bresnick and then find a way to wrap up in a graceful way.
Yeah, I guess I feel like there's a lot to discuss in terms of recommendations with such a short period to do that. So like we have just a few recommendations, but what, you know, are the compilation of recommendations that we have? And it sounds like we're discussing them at one meeting, maybe. So I'm curious about the plan to make sure that we do have some solid recommendations beyond the few that we've discussed in a lot of detail.
I have a project plan for stuff that we need to discuss. I'll share that and we can talk about that as part of the next meeting. With maybe more detail than that, if that's all right.
Sure, I actually can't make the
sure.
next meeting, which is part of my concern, but I can always provide comments for the packet
Okay,
separately.
I'll do quickly
Can
then.
we just go back to the timeline? I have a concern about the March stack.
Yeah,
I would recommend public outreach to give them heads up that we're doing it, but not to openly invite comments and recommendations, because,
So you don't want that?
So I have a suggestion along that line.
yeah,
Let's aim for something in the bridge, a letter or an op-ed by you, but it doesn't have to be written by you, Eric, but you're the author.
Mhm.
That gets published in the bridge in March.
Mhm.
So that announces our recommendations, gives people a chance to input. And gives us, sort of like a stick in the ground for
Right.
something in writing.
I think the committee vehicle would be a hearing, is that correct?
Sorry?
Committee vehicle would be a hearing?
Yeah, but I don't think we need
well, I
that
don't,
here.
no, it's not.
No, not a
Oh,
hearing.
I'm asking, I don't know.
No,
Yeah,
it just needs to be something, an announcement, which
Yeah.
could be a letter or something in the bridge.
Yeah,
And that, no hearings, just, here's where we are.
And let's stick to the topics that people care about rather than the details, because if we go out and, oh, well, Monday doesn't work for me, why are you recommending Tuesday? I mean, we've got to write a report and deliver it.
Yeah.
And we've been doing this for a year. People have had their opportunity provided, but plenty of opportunities.
Mhm.
So,
It's
I
not the
just don't think
report,
we-
it's just an announcement, like,
Yeah.
here are the recommendations. There's gonna be a full report, but here are the recommendations, headlines,
Right.
bullet points.
okay,
I just think that we haven't discussed recommendations in this group. And so no people have been able to react to them. So I do think we need to have time to do that, for them to do that. Are we gonna change recommendations based on what we hear?
I agree, we haven't heard the full recommendations, but if people have ideas about what we should have recommended, there have been plenty of opportunities.
And we've got
That's
we've got some comments.
And we have the survey too, right?
Yeah.
So.
so I want to
Wrap
QA, I want to QA our recommendations to the public before we lock them down.
That's fine.
So I want to talk about structure. I think, there are fingers and toes that need to be in a report, so to speak. Kristen will come back to the data experience narrative. I think
Is that what we mean about like what we wanna keep about town meeting?
yeah, the thing that you were writing, we'll come back to that next meeting. And we can talk about this as part of structure as well. David Allen, I see you have your hand up for public comment, please.
Yes, sir, thank you. There have been strong words from me tonight. I don't mince them, I meant them. There's more to say, but I'll say that, so I'm not very short of time here. The other side of it is, as you are aware, I have said to individually a number of you, even publicly, I am most appreciative for the extraordinary effort that this group put into the matter. Particularly since I spent almost a decade on remote participation and moving it forward. To know David Carr and I will go down to Westford on Friday to begin further discussion there. Since I have heard over years now about the requirements for legislation to get this through, forget about what one committee was able to do on something having to do not with remote participation. I will go back to Carmen Gentile's aid and see whether or not I can confirm what I've heard before, which is that the one home rule needs to be identical. We'll find out about that. And let me again express my thanks for really extraordinary that you all put in here. I'm not going to change my views on some of the other. And unfortunately, you are going to hear from the rest of the town, who are very much larger than the 9 people in this group. That's a separate matter, but again, my thanks.
Good, thank you. Any other comments before I close the meeting? Seeing none, I will say thank you, everyone. I appreciate our discussion tonight, especially when we don't agree. And I really appreciate that. So thank you, everyone. And the time is now
I know 3.
9:03.